It's hard to believe it's been years since I lost him. Time has a strange way of twisting itself around memories, making them fade or grow sharper in unexpected ways. But the one thing I can't forget, no matter how much I wish I could, is the message. It all started on a quiet Tuesday night when the world outside my apartment felt distant, as it often does when you're alone. The glow of my computer screen was the only light in the room, casting an eerie blue haze around me. I was scrolling through old photos on my laptop, lost in a sea of memories. Some were of happy moments, like birthdays, vacations, and the summer days we spent running through the neighborhood as kids. Others were darker, moments before the accident. Jason, my childhood friend, was always the brave one, the one who dared to climb the tallest trees, ride his bike faster than anyone else, and take risks I wouldn't even dream of. I envied him for that. But it was that very fearlessness that led to his death. It was a rainy night, a few days before we were set to leave for college. Jason had been driving, speeding down a slick, winding road that night after a fight with his girlfriend. I remember it so clearly. He'd been angry, shouting about how everything was falling apart. His car skidded on the wet road and collided with a tree, killing him instantly. I couldn't believe it when I got the call. It felt like the world stopped moving, like everything in my life had become this slow-motion nightmare. The funeral was a blur, and after that, I did my best to move on. But every now and then, I'd hear his voice in the back of my mind, just as clear as when he was alive. But that night, something happened, something I still can't explain. I was sitting at my desk when I heard the familiar ping of a new message on my phone. It was late, too late for anyone to be messaging me, so I thought it was probably spam or one of those weird notifications you get when you're signed up for a dozen things you don't remember. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. The message read, "Hey, you up?" At first I thought it was a prank, some sick joke. The number that appeared wasn't one I recognized, but the message itself. It was too familiar. It was Jason's voice, or at least it sounded like it. The same casual, teasing tone he used to send me at midnight when we were in high school, asking me if I wanted to hang out or just talk. I stared at the screen, my heart beating faster. I wanted to ignore it, to tell myself that it was just a mistake. Maybe someone else who'd gotten his old number. But something pulled me toward the message, something I couldn't explain. I typed a response. "Who is this?" Seconds later, another message pinged. "It's me, Jason." The blood in my veins went cold. I didn't know how to react. I thought I was imagining things. There was no way this could be happening. Jason had died. I'd seen the accident report, the funeral, the memorials. It couldn't be him. I quickly typed back, "Jason's dead. Stop messing with me." For a moment, there was no reply. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling as I gripped my phone. Then, another message popped up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I've been trying to reach you for a while." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't funny anymore. Who could be playing this game? I thought about calling the police, but that seemed ridiculous. No one would believe me, especially over something as bizarre as this. "Where are you?" I typed, barely able to form the words. My fingers shook as I stared at the screen. The reply came almost immediately. "I'm still here. I'm stuck." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just some prank. This wasn't just some sick joke. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no way to explain what was happening. I hesitated, then typed, "What do you mean?" There was no response for what felt like an eternity. But then the next message came in. "I need your help." I felt the room close in around me. My mind raced, but I couldn't make sense of it. Could this really be Jason? Was it possible? The only thing I knew for sure was that something was deeply wrong. But why me? Why now? And why was he reaching out from beyond the grave? I felt my pulse quicken as I stared at the screen. What had I gotten myself into? As the messages continued, they only became more cryptic. There were more requests for help, more signs that something unnatural was at play, and I found myself unable to ignore them. This wasn't just some ghost trying to reach out. It was something darker, something more dangerous. But what could I do? How could I even begin to understand what was happening? My childhood friend had died years ago, but somehow he was still contacting me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was only going to get worse from here. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was unfolding, but at the same time I couldn't stop myself from engaging. Maybe it was out of curiosity, or maybe it was the strange part of me that still wanted to believe that Jason was somehow alive, in some form. But what came next was beyond anything I could have imagined. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Sometimes they came in the dead of night, sometimes during the day, at the most unexpected moments. Jason, or whoever was messaging me, seemed to be getting more desperate with every interaction. At first, I tried to rationalize it. It could be someone who had somehow gotten his old number, maybe even someone who had been close to him. But the things this thing, knew about Jason, things that no one else could possibly know, erased all my doubts. One afternoon, I was sitting in the park, just trying to clear my mind, when my phone buzzed again. It was a message from the same unknown number. "Do you remember the tree?" The tree. Jason and I had spent countless hours climbing that old oak tree in my backyard when we were kids. We'd raced to the top, laughing and shouting, daring each other to go higher. It was our spot, our secret place. But that tree had been cut down years ago, long before Jason's accident. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this person possibly know about the tree? I typed back quickly. "What are you talking about?" "The tree's been gone for years." The reply was immediate. "I never left. I'm still here. I'm stuck under the roots." I felt sick. This couldn't be happening. I stood up from the bench, my legs weak beneath me. "Under the roots?" I typed. "What are you talking about?" The messages came faster now, more frantic. "You have to find me. Please, I'm running out of time." I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I grabbed my jacket and left the park, heading straight to the site of the old tree. My feet moved on their own as I walked through the quiet neighborhood, the air thick with the feeling of something unnatural, something wrong. When I reached the spot, it felt like the world had shifted. The place where the tree had stood, once a beautiful sprawling oak, was now just an empty patch of earth overgrown with weeds. But as I looked down at the ground, I couldn't help but feel something pulling at me, urging me to dig. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, certainly not a way to bring Jason back from the dead. But I couldn't ignore the messages. I couldn't ignore the desperate plea for help. So I did it. I knelt down, my fingers trembling, and started to dig. At first it was just dirt and roots, but then something caught my hand, something hard, cold, and metallic. My heart skipped a beat as I scraped away the earth to reveal a small, rusted metal box. It was old, weathered, and locked, but there was something chillingly familiar about it. I paused, my breath shallow, before I pried it open. Inside was a series of old photographs, yellowed with age. But they weren't just any photos. They were of Jason and me, taken years ago. Images from the summer we were inseparable. There were pictures of us laughing, playing in the yard, even of us standing in front of that very tree. But among the pictures, there was one that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of Jason, taken the night of the accident. His face was distorted in a way that I had never seen before. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't the eyes I remembered. They were glassy, hollow, as if something else was staring back at me. I dropped the photo, my hands shaking violently. A voice in my head screamed that this wasn't right, that I shouldn't be here, but I couldn't stop myself. I flipped through the rest of the photographs, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. There was one where Jason appeared to be holding something in his hand, something small and metallic, but the image was too blurry to make out clearly. And then, there it was, the final photograph. It was a picture of a grave, but not just any grave. It was Jason's grave, and the tombstone was wrong. It had his name on it, but the date of death was years after the accident. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the photograph. It was impossible. Jason had died in that accident, but this photograph, it was as if time had been manipulated, as if the truth had been altered in some twisted way. Suddenly, the air around me seemed to grow heavier, the ground beneath me shifting. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my daze. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The message on the screen made my blood freeze. You shouldn't have dug. You shouldn't have opened it. I snapped my head up, my eyes scanning the surroundings. I was alone. The world felt eerily still, as if it was holding its breath. What did you find? I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I didn't know if I was losing my grip on reality or if something truly unnatural was happening. But I knew one thing for certain. Jason's death wasn't the end of the story. And whatever I had just uncovered, it was only the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't escape from. The air around me felt charged, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hand shook as I stared at the phone screen. The message blinked at me almost tauntingly. What did you find? I wanted to throw the phone away, to run from the grave, and from everything that had been happening over the past few days, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, my mind overwhelmed by the strange events. I had to know what was happening. I had to understand. I typed back, my fingers unsteady. How do you know about the photos? The reply came almost instantly. I never left. The words sent a chill down my spine. My thoughts raced as I looked back at the photos in the metal box. They had been buried under the roots of the tree. Buried like something or someone was trying to hide them from me. My stomach twisted with a sickening realization. Jason had never left. Or maybe he hadn't been Jason at all. Maybe something had been controlling his body in the days before his death. Or worse, something still was. I couldn't stay in that place any longer. I shoved the box and photos into my jacket pocket and stumbled away from the grave, my breath coming in short gasps. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the park. Everything felt wrong, as if the world was slipping out of balance and I couldn't catch my breath fast enough. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. It was another message. You opened the box. You shouldn't have done that. My heart raced and I looked around nervously, but there was no one there. Just an empty street stretching out in front of me. The silence heavy. The message didn't make sense. What did it mean by you opened the box? I hadn't done anything wrong, had I? I just found it. Just looked at it. I hadn't done anything. I don't understand, I typed. What do you want from me? The response was immediate and chilling. You'll understand soon. You'll see me again. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I stopped in my tracks, my body frozen with fear. The words "you'll see me again" echoed in my mind, louder and louder. I turned to look behind me again. This time my eyes locked onto something in the distance. There, standing at the edge of the park, was a shadow. A figure. It wasn't clear, but I could feel it staring at me, its presence so palpable that it was almost suffocating. I started to back away slowly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. It was as if it was watching me, waiting for me to react, to make the next move. I was afraid to turn my back on it, but I couldn't keep staring either. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another message. Come back. You haven't finished what you started. The words were a command, not a request, and the fear that gripped me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt. I knew that if I ignored it, if I turned around and left, it would only make things worse. I didn't want to go back to the grave. I didn't want to open the box again. But I also knew that if I didn't, this would never end. With every step I took back toward the grave, I felt a growing sense of inevitability, as if I was walking toward something from which I couldn't escape. My fingers shook as I pulled out the box from my jacket pocket, the lid now oddly warm to the touch. I wasn't sure if it was my nerves or something else. The messages came in rapid succession, one after another. You're close. Do you remember what you saw? I'm waiting for you. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The shadows from the park seemed to move as I approached the grave. It was as if the world around me was bending, twisting, pulling me closer to the inevitable. I didn't want to do this. I wanted to run, to find some way to break free from whatever nightmare I had unwittingly unleashed. But I was too far gone. I was already tangled in it. I reached the grave. The hole in the ground where the tree had been felt colder now, as if the earth itself was rejecting me. I kneeled again, the box still clutched in my hands. The sun had nearly set, leaving everything in a deep, unsettling twilight. I opened the box once more, my fingers trembling, and there it was again. Another photograph, slipped into the folds of the old, yellowed papers. But this time, it wasn't just Jason in the photo. It was me. A photo of me standing at the grave. I could clearly see the back of my head, a shadowy figure just behind me. Someone standing close, yet no one was there when I had taken the photo. You're not alone. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Something was in the air now, something unnatural. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift, moving as though they were alive. The temperature dropped dramatically, and I could feel the weight of invisible eyes on me, pressing in from all directions. I turned around, desperately searching for the source of the presence I could feel behind me. And then, there it was, the figure. It stood just at the edge of the park, its outline becoming more defined in the dimming light. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't Jason. The face was wrong. A mask of dark, hollow eyes and a twisted grin that stretched unnaturally wide. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its presence closing in on me. I took a step back, but my legs felt as if they were glued to the ground. My phone buzzed once more. You'll see me again soon. And then the world went black. When I came to, I was no longer at the grave. My body felt cold, as though I had been somewhere else, somewhere far from the park, but I couldn't remember how I got here. My surroundings were unfamiliar, dimly lit, with the faintest flicker of a single light bulb overhead, swinging slightly as if disturbed by some unseen force. My head pounded, and the taste of metal lingered in my mouth. I tried to move but found my limbs stiff and unresponsive. Panic set in as I realized I was tied to a chair, my wrists and ankles bound tightly. My phone was no longer in my pocket. My stomach twisted as I struggled to recall the last moments, my mind racing, searching for anything that made sense. What happened? I thought desperately. Where am I? Then, the voice. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper coming from the darkness. The tone was unsettling, too calm, too measured. You're awake. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but the room was still shrouded in darkness, save for the faint light that flickered above. My breath caught in my throat. That voice. It sounded like Jason, but it wasn't him. It couldn't be. Suddenly, the light above me flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I struggled against the ropes, my heart racing. I was terrified, but I couldn't stop myself from hoping, praying that I was wrong, that this was just a nightmare. Then the voice returned, louder this time, clearer. You shouldn't have come back. You shouldn't have opened it. I froze. It wasn't Jason's voice anymore, not really. It was like an echo of his, twisted and distorted, like someone else was using his voice to speak. The air grew colder and I could hear something footsteps, slowly drawing nearer. I tensed, trying to prepare for whatever was coming, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. "Do you know why you're here?" the voice asked, though it didn't seem to expect an answer. It was as if it already knew. "You're here because you wanted answers. You opened the box. You wanted to see the truth." I didn't answer, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wasn't sure if I could speak, but I knew I needed to. I had to understand what was happening. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The figure in the shadows moved. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the soft creak of the floorboards under its weight. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the presence grew stronger, closer. I could feel it. It was there, standing just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting for me to face it. "Want from you?" the voice asked, sounding amused. "I'm just here to make sure you finish what you started." And then, in a sudden movement, the figure stepped forward. It wasn't Jason. I could see it now. Its body twisted, distorted in ways that were impossible to describe. The face was the most disturbing part. The features were wrong, as though it had been pieced together from fragments of different people's faces, mismatched and sickening. The eyes, they were hollow, like black pits, and they locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I screamed, the sound echoing in the small room, but the figure didn't react. It simply watched me, its lips curling into a grotesque smile. "I told you," it said. "You'll see me again soon." And then, before I could say anything, before I could even process the horror of what was happening, the room went completely black. I felt the ropes loosen around my wrists and ankles, and the sensation of weightlessness overtook me. I was falling. The sensation lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. My body crashed onto something soft, yet the impact left me dazed and disoriented. I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The place I found myself in was eerily quiet, devoid of any sound except the pounding of my heart in my ears. The air was thick, suffocating, and smelled of mildew and decay. Slowly I sat up, my surroundings coming into focus. I was no longer in the dimly lit room, nor was I outside by the grave. Instead, I found myself in what appeared to be an abandoned house, its walls cracked and peeling. Dust hung thick in the air, and the only light came from the faintest glow seeping in through boarded-up windows. I had no idea how I had gotten here, and then the message appeared on my phone. "I'm waiting for you." I looked around the room in sheer panic. Where was the figure? Why was I here? The message felt like it was suffocating me, its weight pressing on my chest. I stood up shakily, my knees weak, and stumbled toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure. It wasn't behind me anymore, it was right there. The grin stretched wider as it watched me, its hollow eyes gleaming in the dark. No escape. I turned, trying to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if they had become part of the floor itself. The darkness around me seemed to shift and swirl, and then, just as quickly, the figure was gone. The door opened, and a gust of cold wind blew through, carrying with it the distinct smell of earth, of decay. I knew I had to leave, but I also knew that if I did, I would never escape what was following me. "You'll see me again soon," the voice echoed in my mind, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I would never be free from it. Not unless I finished what I started. I was trapped. And this was just the beginning. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped. But it wasn't just the house, the room, or the figure. It was something far worse. This had already happened before. I had no memory of what came next, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt as though everything was repeating, like I was stuck in some kind of loop. The message on my phone blinked again, taunting me. "I'm waiting for you. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out. But I wasn't just trying to escape the figure anymore. I was trying to escape the truth of how I had found myself in this hellish nightmare. I needed answers. The wind howled outside, and the door, still wide open, beckoned me. The house was deathly quiet except for the rush of cold air. As I gathered the courage to move toward the door, I looked over my shoulder. For the first time, I noticed something in the far corner of the room. An old, dusty chair, facing away from me. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to look, but the pull of curiosity was stronger than my fear. Slowly, I turned, my stomach twisting as I took a step closer to the chair. The tension in the air grew thicker with every inch I moved. Then I saw it, the thing that I had somehow known I would see, though I had no conscious reason to expect it. It was Jason, but it wasn't really him. Not completely. His body was slumped in the chair, his skin pale and lifeless, his eyes wide open, but empty, staring at nothing. His mouth hung slightly open, his lips cracked, and his face was drawn in a frozen expression of fear. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't stop myself from walking closer, my hands trembling as I reached out. The air around me grew colder with each step, and the room seemed to warp, like a reflection on water disturbed by a stone. As I touched his shoulder, the phone in my hand buzzed once again. I jerked my gaze down at the screen. The message was no longer the same. "You should have stayed away." The words burned in my mind, sending a wave of panic surging through me. But then, as my eyes refocused on the phone, the screen flickered and distorted. Something was wrong. The message was glitching, half hidden behind static like a broken signal from another world. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The phone screen suddenly went black, and then I heard a whisper, a faint voice barely audible but unmistakable. "Help me." My heart skipped a beat. It was Jason. But how? He was dead. I spun around to face him, the room spinning as I did. My stomach churned as my mind tried to comprehend what was happening. Jason's eyes were still open, but they no longer seemed lifeless. They were full of desperation, full of something else, something darker. And then, in a voice that was no longer his, the figure that had taken Jason's place spoke again. "You shouldn't have done it." The room went cold, freezing my very soul. The words were coming from everywhere at once, echoing in the walls, in the floor, in my mind. I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from anymore, but it was everywhere. "You brought him back," it said, "and now you'll pay the price." The ground beneath me began to tremble, and I stumbled back, my legs failing to hold me steady. The walls of the room seemed to close in, suffocating me with their presence. The air was thick with the scent of rot, and the floor creaked beneath my feet as though the house itself were alive, angry, and hungry. The phone buzzed again. I didn't dare look at it. Instead, I turned to face the door and bolted toward it, my heart racing with a mix of terror and urgency. I had to escape. I had to get out before it was too late. But as I reached the door, something slammed into my chest, sending me crashing to the floor. I gasped for breath, the force of the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I looked up, my vision blurry, and saw the figure standing before me once again, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "You've already seen too much," the figure hissed, "and now you'll never leave." The phone buzzed once more, and I looked at it, helpless. The screen lit up, and for the first time, the words seemed to be aimed at me personally. "You opened the door. You brought him back." And then, the message changed. "You are now mine." A wave of darkness washed over me. The figure loomed closer, its form distorting, becoming more and more monstrous, as if it were pulling itself together from the shadows themselves. I could feel its presence closing in on me, its fingers reaching toward me like claws, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I reached for the door handle, my body trembling, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. I was trapped, And then, in that final moment, just as the darkness consumed me, I understood the truth. The door wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a boundary between worlds, between the living and the dead. I had opened it, and by doing so, I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Jason wasn't coming back, and neither was I. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the message on the phone screen, flashing one final time, goodbye, and then nothing.